I'm Kyle Blakely with Mark Waller, and this is the We Have Issues podcast. I think this is episode 11. So we've rolled into double digits. Before we get started, just another reminder to please subscribe on our YouTube channel first. If you do nothing else on our YouTube channel, you can also subscribe on the audio version of the podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. And I
To
believe
include Spotify.
now Spotify is back up and working, according to my daughter, and who actually beat me up about that for a few weeks, and then somehow it fixed itself. So again,
just tell her this. We're creative geniuses,
yeah,
not technological geniuses.
well, it also proves my point that if I just procrastinate long enough, shit'll take care of itself.
Things just tend to work out. It's good to be Kyle Blakely.
Yes, they absolutely do. So, and
also, Kyle, hey, just for the listeners out there, people watching us, because this is outstanding content that you don't get anywhere else. You got some comments for us? Please drop us a comment. Drop us a comment on our YouTube page. We want your feedback. We want to know what you like about this, what you don't like about it. Don't complain about our faces because they don't get better. That's something we can't improve on. Otherwise, we want to hear your comments. Is this the kind of content you're looking for? You got some ideas on content you want us to cover? We want to hear that too.
yeah, and in fact, we've talked about at some point in the future taking a look at small town politics in Colorado. So if anybody has any good stories about their local small town politics, send them to us. And you never know, we might end up talking about it on an episode or so.
One thing I've learned, Kyle, man, you can go through all levels of government. I mean, you remember Illinois Governor Rod Blagojevich?
Yeah.
He has got nothing on a lot of what these people do in these small town governments. It is un-effing believable.
Well, and hopefully we'll get into that at some point, but it'd be fun if people shot us some ideas for things we weren't aware of. So
yeah, send us some examples, some stuff you've seen happening in the small towns around you. We want to cover that at some point because it'd be freaking hysterical. It will be.
True.
Kyle, why are you in the doctor's office?
Why am I in the doctor's office? I am here because it looks like I have some bone spurs on my feet, which is going to get me my deferment from military service.
Oh, you worried about getting called up at some point? I mean, the Ukrainians are going into Russia now.
Yeah.
The Iranians are going to be attacking Israel. It's only a matter of time before we call folks up.
And especially 62-year-olds. So,
well, it could happen. You probably actually do have bone spurs, so that'll be good.
Yeah, I actually probably do. But we'll hear more about that later. So, hey, before we get into today's topic, which we're going to talk today, start the discussion today, and it's going to have to go into next episode. We're going to start talking about the laundry list of ballot issues that we're going to see in Colorado this fall. 10 on the ballot right now, 6 more could be coming, and we'll get into that in a minute. But the first thing I want to talk about is we had a comment on the We All Have Issues Facebook page recently from Gary Kirkland, pointing out, I think this was yesterday, pointing out about Tina Peters was convicted on 7 of the 10 counts against her, and 4 of them were felony convictions. So we've talked about this off air before, but go ahead. I'm anxious to see.
I think Tina Peters summed it up as well as this thing could be summed up when she was speaking to her then deputy and said, "I'm fucked." I
Is that
think
the exact quote? I thought it was
that
something.
is an exact direct quote, at least according to her deputy.
Oh, how
After,
funny.
these voter files and information got released online, direct quote, Tina Peters, I'm fucked. That's what she said.
Well, and
Prophetic, perhaps.
felony, she could be.
Well, I don't know. She is. It's been proven now. She's there. It's just a matter of how fucked is she going to be, right?
Yeah, well, true.
Is she going to go to jail or not? For this case, and by the way, the criminal justice system, a lot of times people use jail and prison, indiscriminately. They describe both are described as being in custody, but they're actually very different things.
Yep.
Jail you serve at local, county
County level.
jail that's controlled by the sheriff's office. Prison, you actually go to the big house. That's the penitentiary handled by the State Department of Corrections. She could end up doing either here, or neither. We just don't know. But convicted, a 7 counts, and I'll tell you, I think normally this would be, I'm an old deputy district attorney, prosecutor. Normally you wouldn't see a whole lot of prison or jail for a crime like this, but you kind of wonder when it comes to screwing with elections. That is something that I think, not only the courts obviously are going to take very seriously, but I think we as a society should take very seriously. I mean,
Absolutely.
very seriously. And I think that people are kind of see the magnitude of this, saying, when you're trying to screw with the outcome of elections, and I mean, she can make the argument that that's not what she was doing. She was just trying to put all the information out there. But when it's interpreted that you're trying to screw with the outcome of elections, I think that is the kind of thing that could come with a prison sentence and not just a probationary sentence, even though this is, her first offense. Typically first offense people, unless it's a very serious crime, don't go to jail or prison.
Even felonies, people don't get jail time sometimes for felonies on their
Kyle.
conviction.
You live a sheltered life, my friend. Yeah, most of the time people don't go to prison for felonies. And again, unless it's a serious crime, right?
Yeah,
Unless it's some sort of assault, murder, rape, something like that, child pornography, something that's, really kind of serious, drug related felony. Oh God, no.
yeah. Interesting.
Or these white collar crimes, a lot of times people don't go to prison for them.
Huh. Well, the irony is with 4 felony convictions, doesn't she lose her right to vote?
No, not necessarily. You only lose in the state of Colorado, you only lose your right to vote if you're actually in custody. So like once you're out,
Oh,
or if you're on now they're if you're on parole, so you're out of prison, but you're still in custody. I know the law used to be that you didn't get to vote. I know there were some attempts to change that. I don't think that's happened.
oh,
But you're on probation. Yep, you can vote. You've served your sentence. Definitely your right to vote is restored.
okay.
Now here's the one though that no, she'll never get probably will never have the ability to own a firearm again.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
Yeah. You get convicted of a felony, that's generally something you don't ever get to do. Now, some people have petitioned courts and had their rights to carry a firearm, or the Second Amendment rights restored, but that rarely happens.
Interesting. Well, I assume sentencing will be coming up in a few weeks or a couple of months or something
Yeah,
like
I
that.
think I saw October 5th.
Oh, okay.
But I'll tell you, here's what is striking to me in this whole deal that I didn't understand before, as I've kind of gone through this case. I didn't understand the level to which people in the Republican Party here in Colorado coordinated with her to make these things happen. In fact, her deputy at one point said this Republican activist in Colorado, a lady named Sharona Bishop, big in the Republican Party here a few years ago. I think has since moved. Probably smartest thing she's done to avoid getting charged. But
Yeah.
Sharona Bishop, again, member of the Republican Party here in the state of Colorado, is calling Tina Peters deputy and telling her what to do to, delete files, use burner phones, engage in all this like sort of nefarious activity. It is unbelievable, Kyle.
And are any of those people getting any charges filed against them, or is
So,
that?
so the deputy has already pled.
Yeah.
She pled to a misdemeanor, and part of the plea deal was that she would testify against
Oh, okay.
Tina Peters. But to my knowledge, Sharona Bishop hasn't been charged. And as I've kind of, read the newspaper reports, and I will be the first to admit I haven't read the discovery or the file or anything like that. But boy, based on what I've read in the newspaper, I'm kind of shocked that she was not charged in this.
Huh. Huh. Yeah.
I'm guessing we're probably beyond the statute of limitations now
Oh,
to charge somebody, but maybe not.
yeah. That was 4 years ago, so you're probably right.
Yeah, almost 4 years ago. And a lot of times on some of these felonies, the statute is 4, but for some it's 3 and 2.
Hmm.
But that I just absolutely unbelievable to me, the sort of magnitude of the direction Tina Peters was getting. And, what a dumbass on her part for, trading her job and her freedom for some sort of fame and favor, with the My Pillow guy.
Oh,
Just
that. Oh, that's hilarious. Well, we'll keep an eye on it. Again, there's no shortage of interesting things that happen in our little state, and so we'll track that with some of the other stuff. But
well, here's something to consider. As I've sort of, tried to gameplay this out, and lots of things have to happen in order for us to get here. But what happens? Tina Peters ends up in jail, ends up in prison, whatever it is, and Donald Trump becomes the next president of the United States.
oh, she's parole, whatever he does, parole, whatever it's called,
Pardon.
pardon. She'll get pardoned.
Boy, I don't know, Kyle. You think that's going to happen, but, didn't happen for Michael Cohen. Hasn't happened for Steve Bannon. Of course, he was convicted afterwards, but, you ended up not seeing a whole lot of pardons coming out of the DJT White House.
Interesting. Well, at least she'll have a good pillow while she's in there.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, send her My Pillow. That's a good one.
Yeah.
I guess he did pardon Blagojevich, didn't he?
Did he really? So he's
He
no
did,
he's
yeah.
not in Denver anymore?
Yeah, he pardoned Blago.
Oh, because Blago was up in Denver. Huh.
Yeah, he was. He was a resident of Colorado.
I think with the subway guy.
The subway guy?
The guy that used to do the subway commercials.
Oh, Jared, yeah.
Jared, yeah. They were I think they were in the same facility.
In Denver. Well, the Unabomber is down south.
I think he died.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, I think he died. But if you go online, they give you a list of who's there.
Like Manuel Noriega was in Colorado for a long time, right?
Yeah, the list of people in Supermax is incredible.
I mean, Timothy McVeigh was here.
Yep, and his accomplice is still there.
Terry Nichols.
Yep, yeah, Gary Nichols, he's still there. Yeah,
Wow.
but
Yep.
that whole list is online. But so today we're going to start the conversation about what the ballot's going to look like this November in Colorado.
I was going to say, speaking of criminal acts, let's talk about ballot initiatives. No, I'm kidding.
Well, and this is just initiatives. This doesn't include all the other stuff that each community gets in terms of local elections and local issues and school board issues and all of that stuff. This is just the state initiatives. Right now, there's 10 that have qualified for the Colorado ballot, and there's 6 more that have turned in signatures and are waiting to hear if they made it on the ballot. So next week, we'll probably go into some of the ones that are probably a little bit less known, and talk about those a little bit. But the kind of the big two that you hear most about are 108 and 50. And now, just over the last week or so, there's even a possibility that as much attention as they've gotten, those two issues actually may be coming off the ballot. So, but these two are interesting. Simply, they're kind of related, tied to property tax issues. One being capping the increase. Your property taxes can't go up by more than 4% a year. And the other one slashes assessment rates. And so there's, if you read up on them, there's all kinds of potential ramifications or benefits, depending on which side you're on. But yeah, those two seem to be the two most popular ones at this point.
I think these are going to be very difficult. But before we get on talking about those, first of all, I think people need to understand some of these initiatives are statutory, meaning that they're going to change the statutes in the state of Colorado. Others are constitutional, meaning they're going to actually change the Constitution in the state of Colorado. And people might ask, oh, who cares? What's the difference? Number one, anything that's constitutional, let's say some sort of statutory measure is passed later, the Constitution overrides. So it's got, more heft to it. Two, it's harder, like the legislature wants to repeal something from the Constitution. It takes a greater than majority vote in the state legislature in order to do that. Much greater vote in the state legislature in order to do that than it does for a statutory issue.
Okay, so who decides if something's going to be statutory or constitutional? Is that up to the person who writes the initiative or whatever? They get to decide where it fits?
Yes, that's correct. You decide, Kyle and Mark want to do a ballot initiative that says, hey, if people don't get out of the left lane when I'm driving, I can just ram them with my car. We get to decide if we want that to be constitutional or statutory. But here's the rub. It takes a much greater vote in order to get a constitutional initiative passed. You got to get 55% of the vote, when it goes to the electorate, as opposed to just 50% plus one.
Oh, interesting. So also, aren't there two ways for an issue to get on the ballot? Can't the legislature put something on the ballot, and then you can also petition on by getting like 125,000 signatures?
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so statutorily, legislature can do it with, my memory serves me correctly, it's a simple majority vote.
Okay.
In the state legislature in order to get a statutory change to the ballot. But if it's a constitutional amendment change, I think it's 2/3 in order to do that. And by the way, you're talking about the sort of ridiculousness of how many initiatives we have going to the ballot this year. If you printed out the U.S. Constitution on, your standard printer paper, 8x10, it would take up a few pieces of paper, right? Like, not pretty thin stack of papers. For listeners out there, I'm holding my fingers together closely. But if you printed out Colorado's Constitution, you're talking like a ream of paper, Kyle. Because it is just that easy to change.
It's probably why nobody prints it in a little booklet and hands it out at parade.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, let me have the pocket Constitution for the state of Colorado and take a fucking backpack to carry that around. And oftentimes, we end up with competing provisions. We end up with provisions that say one thing that the next provision requires another thing that's in direct opposition. So for example, there's a constitutional amendment to fund education, right? Well, that's in conflict with Tabor, which was in conflict with the constitutional amendment, the Gallagher amendment about how property taxes are divided between commercial and residential.
Yep.
All of those things are in conflict together, and it's a point. As courts are like, well, shit, I don't know what to do. We always described it in my days in the legislature as this Gordian knot related to it. So, I will tell you, generally speaking, as an attorney, former legislator, former local elected official, I have never been a fan of supporting constitutional changes to constitutional initiatives in the state of Colorado. Because if it needs to be done, it should be able to be done statutorily. Otherwise it should go through the legislative process. I don't want, the Constitution in the state of Colorado to be changed based on, an ad on TV that Melissa Etheridge does. And that's how we ended up with legalization of marijuana in the state of Colorado. She comes on TV and talks about all these people going to prison. Well, the constitutional amendment didn't do shit to change that, right? It was decriminalization of an ounce or less of marijuana, which was never more than a misdemeanor. And people don't go to prison for misdemeanors in the state of Colorado.
How funny.
You can't. You legally can't. That's the difference between the whole jail and prison discussion. And so I think it is, irresponsible at best, and unethical at worst to put a lot of these issues on the ballot that folks want to be a constitutional change, and then they market them in such a way that gets them passed, and they're not being honest about what they're doing.
Yeah, although it is a gamble if it's 55% to pass a constitutional one. You gotta, I'm sure polling comes into play there with some of that, but I mean, that would suck to get to pay for 125,000 signatures and then get 54% of the vote.
When I was in the legislature, we actually passed that. We had to do we had to go through the legislative process to pass a bill with 2/3 support because it is a change to the Constitution, right? To put it on the ballot and then allow the people to decide. But it was amazing to me. We sort of joke sometimes in politics that people go so far to the left, and then sometimes people go so far to the right that they meet on the backside of the moon. That was always sort of the joke. So, you're standing here, people go so far to the left, they just keep going and going and going, and then they go around to the back. People so far to the right, going, they go around to the back. This is one of those times where the far right and the far left, this is where you had Doug Bruce standing arm in arm with the ACLU.
Is there a photo of that somewhere?
Yeah, well, that's figuratively speaking, that they are standing arm in arm because they want to have that access to be able to change the Constitution in the state of Colorado.
Yeah.
They want that. They want to be able to do that and do it as easily as they possibly can. So that's a lot. And boy, we haven't even talked about 50 and 108 yet.
Yeah, and again, that's just 2 of what could be 16. It's the sheer volume to me is incredible. And I've worked on enough campaigns and been close enough to it. A lot of times you hear people worried about ballot fatigue, that people won't go far enough down the ballot. I'm not sure how much I agree with that, but my God, if it's ever going to happen, this fall might be when we see it.
Yeah, here's what I think happens when it comes to the ballot fatigue issue. It's not that people don't vote on them. It's that they think the safe answer is no.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's like, oh, shit, man, there's too much to read here. No. And I get that. I understand that. I think when you look at these ballot initiatives and you think, geez, there's no way we need 16 of these in the state of Colorado, right? Oftentimes, I think these things get put on the ballot, not because people want the policy, but because they're trying to energize their voters to get out and vote.
Oh, interesting.
I'll give you an example, and we'll talk a whole lot more about this one next week. But and obviously these ballot initiatives have been discussed and in the works for months and months and months, right? Like they had to go out and gather signature, they'd go through the title board process, get approved, go out and gather signatures, bring them back, get them verified, get it on the ballot, right? So months and months and months in this process. Well, a few months ago, Joe Biden is the Democratic nominee for president, right?
Yep.
And how were Democrats feeling? How energized were they to get out and vote for, this old guy that doesn't remember anything?
Not much.
Not at all, right? So the Democrats are like, man, we got to get some voter intensity going. We got to get something. We can't get Democrats energized about the people who are on the ballot. So maybe we can get them energized about the initiatives that are on the ballot. And so you see this kind of across America right now. All of these states are putting abortion issues on the ballot, right? To preserve women's right to an abortion. And there might be some states that, have completely Republican controlled, House, Senate, and governor's mansion that where they're worried that there actually is going to be some sort of ban or something like that, right? In the state of Colorado, and so this is an initiative that's on the ballot this year in the state of Colorado, preserving a woman's right to an abortion.
In the Constitution.
Yep. Now, Kyle, in the state of Colorado today, what right does a woman have to an abortion?
The right to choose.
They have the right to choose. And they not only have the right to choose, they have the right to choose up until delivery. Like Colorado is one of a few states in the nation that preserves a woman's right to choose, or another way to say it, to terminate that baby up until the point that it is delivered. So if a woman has a baby at 8 months and it's outside the womb, obviously you can't kill it, right? But if it's 9 months or 9 months and 2 weeks and it's still in the womb, you can have an abortion legally in the state of Colorado. And there is literally, Kyle, nothing in this state that can change that right now, because the Democrats control all 3 legs of that branch that would be required to change that, right? And really, truly, all they need is one to kill a bill. If Republicans come forward with a bill that says, hey, we want to limit termination of pregnancies at the 6-week point or the 12-week point or whatever it is, it just takes the House to kill that bill or the Senate to kill the bill or the governor to veto the bill. So in this case, the Democrats have all 3 legs of the branch, yet they're still went through the expense of going to get 125,000 signatures to preserve this for all time in the state of Colorado. Why? Not because they needed to do it, but because of voter intensity.
I think voter intensity, but I also think it's just an insurance policy for if at some point down the road, if they aren't in control again, if it's like you said, if it's a constitutional amendment or change, it's at least harder to overturn down the road. So I would think it might be a combination of both of those things, but
well, it's an insurance policy they could have run 10 years from now, because let me tell you, I know the Republican Party in the state of Colorado, and they ain't taking all 3 legs of the branch, all 3 legs of the stool anytime soon, pal.
Anytime soon.
And the Democrats know that. I mean, this is truly a voter intensity issue, and I get it. I mean, they want to energize their side to come out and vote, and this is a way to do it. I mean, believe me, Republicans do it too. Really, I think you could make a great argument that 108 and 50 are that.
Yeah, true. But the real winner in all of this is the signature collection companies,
Oh my
because
gosh.
that's about $2.5 million to get 125,000 signatures. So just to get on the ballot, 2.5 million. I don't know how many of the 10 got signatures to go on, but you got the other six. I mean, you're talking 15 to $20 million worth of signature collection in Colorado in the last 6 months. Just
Oh
on,
yeah. And it's, I mean, you're talking even with ballot initiatives, it's a little bit cheaper per signature, but with candidates, you're $20, $25 per signature.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, just a few years ago, 2016, I'm running for office. It's $7 a signature. And now it's over 2,000 or over $20 a signature.
Yeah. And um, so who knows, maybe pretty soon the sponsor of our podcast will be the We Have Issues signature collection company.
I got
So
lots of good ideas about that, how we need to change those things to make that different. But 108 and 50, I think
yeah,
you've heard, we talked about it last week. Actually, they're working on maybe a special session to
that's
avoid having these things end up going to the ballot.
yeah. And so again, a lot of the articles you read doesn't even distinguish what each one of them does. They're so hand in hand. But ironically, 108 hasn't passed the signature threshold yet. It's still on part of the six that aren't necessarily on, but I think it's a foregone conclusion. Everybody thinks it would qualify. But 50's again the one that caps property tax increases at 4% a year. 108 slashes assessment rates. And the governor wants to do a special session to develop a compromise, I believe, because of the potential damage it could do to communities and special districts and school districts and the like that are more heavily dependent on property taxes.
And interestingly, so these are being put forward by the same group. I know the Independence Institute has had a lot to do with backing these initiatives and getting them moving forward. Interestingly, 108 is a statutory change where 50 is actually a constitutional change. And so, and it's sort of, if you, once you read them, it makes more sense, or it makes sense as to why that would happen. Number one, to your earlier point, it's riskier if, to get the 55% in order to pass something. And really, I think you can look at 108 as kind of a one-time dollar issue, or a little bit more of a one-time dollar issue, where 50 is a kind of a year over year change. So 108 just simply says this year, hey, we're going to reduce the assessment rates. Residential property is assessed at some rate. We're going to reduce that down to like 7.125%. Commercial is assessed at 28, 29%. We're going to reduce that to 24%. And those numbers just changed slightly because of legislation that was passed this year. They tried to solve this issue in the legislative session, but the proponents of these initiatives thought it didn't go far enough. It wasn't enough of a fix, and that's why these initiatives are moving forward. So 108 is kind of interesting. It says we're just going to reduce the assessment rate for this year, which taxpayer I'm happy about, man. My taxes went up like 40% on my house from the last assessment. And so this one says we're going to reduce that rate, but that comes at a price tag of $3 billion. Like just reducing the commercial rate a little bit and reducing the residential assessment rate, $3 billion to local governments and schools in the state of Colorado.
In 1 year?
1 year.
Good Lord.
1 year. $3 billion.
Wow.
Is the projected, and that's projected, by the way, not by a Republican or a Democrat. but by the nonpartisan legislative office.
Yep.
$3 billion. But that's to local governments. And so you're saying to yourself, well, why does this have any impact on the state, right? Like, why does the state need to call a special session in order to fix this? That $3 billion reduction is required to have a percentage offset by the state government. So it's like,
they would backfill then
that's right.
to those other governments. Do they have to backfill 100% of it?
No.
Oh,
They have to backfill 100% to certain entities.
okay.
So the way to look at this, municipalities, so you live in the city of Colorado Springs, they're largely dependent on sales tax. So they really don't use a lot of property tax. There's a little bit that goes into that, but not very much. Counties, very dependent on property tax. Special districts, so you live in a fire district that's not, connected to a city or a municipality. You live in a library district. You live in a special district that's created, a lot of times new construction creates special districts in order to fund roads and things of that nature. And then obviously schools are, a form of a special district, a school district, right? So of this $3 billion, about 800 million of it, 800 million of it's projected to come to be at the expense of K through 12. Amendment 23, constitutional amendment, requires backfill from the state when it's reduced at the lower level. So the state doesn't even get to choose there. We got to backfill that. That's required. And actually, that's actually required in this statutory initiative. Proposition 108 says you're going to backfill schools, state government. And we're also going to make special districts whole. So state government, you got to backfill them as well. So we'll reduce that property tax rate, but you got to backfill those special districts. So, the Hanover Fire District, the Black Forest Fire District, the Woodman Hills Metropolitan District, stuff like that. That's going to get backfilled. Guess who really isn't? Counties.
Ooh. Wow.
So very little backfill coming for counties there. And so once you sort of add all this up, $3 billion, that's what the projections are that this is going to cost local governments. 2.2 is mandated to be backfilled by the state.
So I should know this, but I don't. Does the state get any property tax revenue, or is it strictly just a very tiny bit?
Yeah, just in kind of very limited circumstances, just a little bit, but not much at all.
Okay.
It's, the state's general fund budget is, almost exclusively sales tax and fees.
Okay, and the state budget is close to 40 billion. But, 2.2, 5% doesn't sound like a horrible amount of money when you're talking about 40 billion, but it's actually a much bigger issue. And you were explaining this to me offline the other day, because the legislature, the amount of money out of the budget, the legislature can actually impact or has say in on how it's spent is much lower, correct?
Yeah, somewhere between actually 12 and 15%. So look at it like this. Amendment 23, constitutional amendment that says you got to fund K through 12 education, right? So the legislature doesn't get a say in the state dollars that go to fund K through 12 education. 43, 44, 45% right off the top. Got to go to K through 12. The state legislature has zero control or say over that funding mechanism. They have to do it. They constitutionally are required to do it. They don't do it, they get sued and lose. And then you think about Medicaid and Medicare. Medicare is funding that comes from the federal government, which requires a lot of matching Medicaid dollars in order to get those federal funds to come down. That probably makes up, in my time in the legislature, that made up about 30% of the budget. And I'm guessing that's more today. as you know, we've expanded Medicaid and expanded Medicare, expanded Medicaid in the state of Colorado and Medicare in the United States. And so the legislature gets no choice there either. And then the prisons come in and say, hey, you know what? You got to keep people in prison. You don't get a choice not to fund that because we close prisons down. You're letting people go. So you got to fund the prisons, right? And so then it comes down to maybe, I mean, realistically, maybe 10 to 15% of that $40 billion. So let's say $6 or $8 billion is really what the legislature gets a chance to have control over.
Hey, so somewhere between 6 and 8, and you take 2.2 off of that. I mean, that's really the 2.2 is 25% of the budget that's actually,
yeah, maybe more, maybe 30 or 35% of the budget, right?
Yeah, true. Could be even that.
So then you say, well, okay, then what gets cut? The same things that always get cut: higher education and roads.
Yep.
I mean, those are the areas that you can go to cut. There really aren't many other areas that they have the ability to go cut. When I started in the legislature, higher ed made up about 9 or 10% of the budget. It's probably less than 2 today.
Wow. So the special session, the compromise, is there anything out there as far as what the governor wants from a compromise?
Well, yeah. Yeah, and I guess realistically, we should probably talk about 50 just a little bit. So 108 is the one that makes this sort of one-time reduction.
Yeah.
I mean, that reduction will be permanent, but it really has that one-time impact, right? Like of a $2.2 billion reduction, or a $3 billion reduction overall. Then it can, it can grow back up over years, but it has to start with that reduced baseline. So it will have an impact in future years, but realistically, look at that as a really a 2025 problem, a next year problem, right? The next budget cycle problem, huge problem. 50 says, all right, and this is constitutional. Right now, legislation passed last year that says you have to cap growth at 5.5% a year on the tax rate for properties. So your tax rate can't increase on your property. Even if the valuation goes up 100%, the tax valuation of your property can't increase by more than 5.5%. So your taxes can't go up by more than 5.5%. This would reduce that number to 4%, and that would be in place forever. Okay.
And it does require a table refund.
Absolutely. Well, if the growth is over 4%, it requires, you have to go, just kind of like with Tabor, you have to go ask the people if you can keep the money.
Yeah.
And a lot of times that's really hard to do. And so the projections for next year are, well, that's only $115 million. All the local governments, that's not going to have an impact at all on the state government. There aren't backfill requirements. I mean, there'll be a little bit of K through 12 backfill required there, but that's not a huge deal. But that's only based on the projection. The Office of Budget and Planning in the state of Colorado projects, future projections on budgets, right? They don't necessarily come true, but they are projecting that there's going to be an overall in the state of Colorado 4.7% growth, as opposed to, that, the limit would be, if this constitutional amendment passes, the limit, it would be limited to 4% growth. So they base the cost on that, the difference between 4% and 4.7%, which it ends up being about $115 million for this year. But that's one that's going to have an impact year over year. You have 15% inflation, you're still um,
Yeah.
and revenues are, through the roof, you're still restricted by that 4% growth, which kind of creates that whole Tabor ratchet effect that people have talked about so many times.
Yeah.
You go through an economic downturn, the budget goes down, but you're not allowed to grow back out of it at the same rate that the economy is growing. You're restricted to 4%.
Yeah.
Maybe the economy is booming at 8%, but you're restricted to 4%.
Okay.
And
So,
so that's a huge issue as well.
yeah. So you kind of couple those two together. I'm sure the governor's panicking or worried or whatever. But so what's the compromise? What
Well,
would
so here, I mean, it's a giant game of chicken, Kyle. That's kind of where we are, because first of all, I think we should talk about, well, how about this? It is a giant game of chicken. That's what we're looking at right now. And a giant game of chicken in that we could not do a special session. The governor's kind of sitting in the governor's mansion, talking to the speaker, the Senate majority leader, saying, hey, we could not do a special session, and just hope that the voters vote against these two initiatives. But I'm here to tell you, I know the voters experience this in their pocketbook, right? Like,
Yep.
they get it. This isn't some esoteric conversation that they're having. People's property taxes went up, and they went up by a lot.
Yeah.
The chances of these initiatives passing are massive. But the Democrats are out there saying, yeah, maybe we can make that argument to the public to keep these initiatives from passing. If we put enough money into it, we get enough of our donors to put money into these, maybe we'll get them killed. Because it's always easier to vote no on a ballot initiative, to that whole ballot fatigue conversation we were having, than it is to vote yes, right? So you got some of them kind of sitting back saying, man, we got this issue going on. And then we talked about that voter intensity thing earlier, and that's why one of the reasons Democrats put abortion on the ballot, right? They want to increase the number of their people to come out and vote. Well,
Yeah.
on the Republican, on our side of the ledger, on my side of the ledger, there are a lot of people that aren't excited about the top of the ticket, or the people they have to vote for. And so they also want to increase voter intensity. And believe me, if there's anything that motivates a bunch of Republicans to get out and vote, it's reducing their taxes.
True.
Which is what this is going to do. And so the Democrats are like, do we do this special session? But if we do the special session and we come up with some sort of compromise, we got to own the difference in the compromise and what these initiatives would have done.
Yep.
But if we do a special, or if we don't do a special session, more Republicans might come out and vote. And then we got to own what ends up happening, what the result of the election is.
True.
And so there are these massive conversations going on. And I think it's kind of funny. I think the Republicans are sitting back saying,
Yeah.
this is your problem. You deal with it. We're not going to weigh in at all.
Yeah. And from what I understand, the game of chicken has to be resolved by September 6th. Because
before ballots go out.
Yeah, because after September 6th, they can't take it off the ballot.
Here's what I'm not sure about already, Kyle. I'm not sure if they can take it off the ballot. I think this is the other thing I wanted to talk about, which is a perfect lead-in. Thank you. This hasn't been legally challenged before. Does an entity that puts something on the ballot, once the voters, once the electorate, once the people of the state of Colorado decide to give enough signatures to say this is a worthwhile issue to have on the ballot, can the proponents of it just pull it off? I don't know. There could be some legal challenges associated with that, and they'd have to be resolved freaking quickly.
Yeah, very quickly.
So another thing
that September 6th. So I don't know.
Well, but that's printing of ballots, right? And there's some discussions about that.
Yeah.
So maybe the part of the negotiated settlement is, hey, we're gonna the proponents are just gonna say vote no on these.
Oh.
Like, it's still on the ballot, but we're just gonna have you vote no. I mean, I think what they really want to do is have them taken off the ballot,
Yeah,
which is what that September 6th date is. I'm just not sure they can legally do it. And I
yeah,
guarantee you there's going to be a challenge to that.
yeah.
Doug Bruce will challenge that. I mean, it is this fascinating issue that we have going on here. And I'll tell you, I'm super torn over these because I've seen the dollars necessary for local government in order to be successful, right? And listen, we've had double-digit inflationary, spending in the United States over the last few years. So it's not like, they get more property tax dollars in. Those are just newfound dollars. I mean, they're paying more in, medical coverage. They're paying more in other insurance costs. They're paying more in staffing requirements, right? They have to be able to pay a living wage to the people that work for those governments. So I'm sensitive to that. I'm sensitive to all the cuts that are going to come at the expense of the state having to backfill this. But at the same time, I'm a property owner and I don't want my taxes going up 40%.
Yeah,
And in some places it's 100%.
true.
So I think this is an incredibly difficult situation and circumstance for people to be in. I think it's kind of interesting. El Paso County, and I'm not going to drop any names here, but I've been talking to a lot of friends in El Paso County. These ballot initiatives pass, it is going to be a significant impact to the budget in El Paso County. But I can tell you right now, commissioners aren't going to go out on a limb and say, hey, vote against these. I don't even think they're going to go out on a limb and say, have a special session to come up with a compromise, because they just don't want to be viewed by the voters
Yeah,
as being, like the people that are advocating for their citizens, their constituents' property taxes to go way up.
yeah.
It is
Interesting.
an incredibly difficult and complicated scenario. I feel like I understand these things pretty well, and ask me whether you should vote for them or not vote for them. I don't have an answer.
Yeah, exactly. And again, how much between now and November 5th will the average voter fully understand it? Because if you just go read the ballot language, you're probably more inclined to vote for it. At least in my view, you don't think through or understand all the escalating ramifications from it, from the ballot language. So that'll
Well,
be, well,
and you get Melissa Etheridge to, run your ad and say, hey, vote against or vote for your property taxes to go down. What are people going to do? They're going to vote for their property taxes to go down, of course.
absolutely. Well, we may know more about this next week when we get into the long list of other initiatives. And I'm looking at the list here and it's just fascinating. And maybe some of the other 6 will be on the ballot by then. And I'm hoping so, because between now and November, we will have some folks who are supporting or opposed to some of those issues on the podcast to talk more in depth about it. So hopefully we could become a resource for voters in terms of understanding those issues a little more deeply to make a more informed decision. At least I hope we can do that. So, but now it brings us to that moment in time when,
Well, real quick, before we get there, I just want to say, generally speaking, I'm not a fan of changing our Constitution all the time. Again, takes up about a
yeah,
ream of paper, right? So unless it's something that is incredibly meaningful and I think that just really needs to happen, I'm generally of the mind, vote no on any constitutional changes. Statutory is a whole lot different, just
yeah.
because we shouldn't be cluttering up our Constitution with all this stuff.
Okay. Interesting. Well, as we get into that list, we'll try and make sure we point out which ones are statutory, which ones are constitutional. as we're getting into those deeper discussions so people understand that. So cool. Well, so what this week, anything pissing you off?
Kyle, this week has been we'll call it a target rich environment. Lots of stuff pissing me off this week. But one in particular I want to talk about, and I'll tell you, this is actually something that's pretty meaningful to me. It's this idea, I always like to say to folks, there was an episode of Seinfeld once, right? Where this lady is heckling Seinfeld. I don't know if you remember the episode. It's awesome.
Yeah, it's
and then turnabout's fair play, right? He shows up at her office and heckles her in her job. It seems to me when people, and by the way, people feel like they have the right, the absolute God-given right to weigh in on every single issue, every single time, in every single forum that they can find to do that. That happens, right? Even when they don't understand the issue that they're weighing in on. So I think there's, especially when it comes to what people do, I just think it's generally bad practice to weigh in on those sorts of issues. Like, so I'll give you a couple of examples that where I'm guilty of this and I do it and I'm wrong. Oftentimes when Craig Counsell, the Chicago Cubs manager, makes a mistake, sometimes I'll be online, well, Craig Counsell really effed that up. Knowing I have zero concept of what it's like to be a manager in Major League Baseball, right? Like, I don't understand the all of the thought process that goes into that, the economics of it, even the data and stuff that's related to that. But, sometimes people weigh in on that. Other sorts of circumstances as well. Here's where it's of particular, what irritates me beyond anything is when people do that related to military service.
Okay.
Now, if somebody in the military is claiming something that they shouldn't be claiming, that's one thing, right? They're stealing valor. I'm wearing medals on my chest that don't belong to me. That's easily, that's related to my representation or embellishment of my service. Go after it all day long. I get it. I understand it. I appreciate it. But if you don't understand military service and what goes in it, especially if you haven't served, it's hard to understand what goes into military service. Shut the fuck up. You don't need to weigh in on the quality of somebody's service. That's happened to me running for office. I deployed to fucking Baghdad, Iraq. Prosecuted insurgents when I'm in Iraq. I've got people back here saying, well, he really didn't prosecute people. He's using the wrong word there. He just processed them. Or I had a person once say to me, and these are political leaders in the state of Colorado, former mayor of Colorado Springs, diminishing my service and has no fucking idea what it's about, right?
Yeah.
Like, no idea at all. He didn't go. He wasn't in Iraq separating himself from his family for whatever period of time it is. Putting yourself in harm's way, which, by the way, I have always admitted a lawyer in the green zone is way different than, one of those young Marines out there knocking down doors in Fallujah. I mean, they really put it on the line every day. We just got bombed a little bit, right?
Yeah.
But if you haven't been there, you don't get to talk about it. You don't get to talk about the quality of that service. I got a problem with that. I had somebody say to me, so when you prosecuted people in Iraq, it was for what? It was for writing graffiti on the walls or for littering? Like, you gotta be fucking kidding me. The reason that we're in Iraq away from our families is because we're trying to clean up graffiti? No, we're there for democratic purposes.
Yeah.
because Saddam Hussein is a threat to our interest in the region, not
Yeah.
because of graffiti. So you don't get to say that.
Yeah.
I get with it, and this Walt thing, it kind of triggers me a little bit, right?
Yeah. I was going to say, this is back in the forefront nationally with Walz being picked to be the vice presidential candidate.
And I get it. I get that there's been some embellishment there. You know, the guy says at one point, you know, makes a comment about being in combat, and he wasn't in combat. I get that. I get the calling him out on that. But the guy served 24 years. He served 24 years honorably. You know, which, by the way, nobody seems to give it. Well, he didn't go to Iraq or he didn't go to Afghanistan when his unit deployed. Guess what? You serve 24 years, you get to retire when you want to retire.
Yeah.
You do, because you've done it
before they got called up
for all that time, right? Yeah. And he made a value decision in his life. Hey, I want to run for Congress. This is where I feel that I can serve better. And so it's time for me to retire. I don't think it had anything to do with being a chicken or being afraid to go deploy or not deploy. It's, you know, this is a value decision. I've served I did 24 years of giving up all, you know, my weekends, 1 weekend a month, 24 years of giving up my vacations to do military duty. You know, I mean, I can remember being in the reserves, you know, and that reserve weekend comes up and you're like, man, I've just worked, you know, my job as a deputy district attorney. I worked 50, 60, 70 hours doing that job. And now I gotta suck it up and do the reserve duty. That's not always easy, even if it just sounds like it's a weekend a month, but it's still time away from your family. It's time, it's, you know, it's recovery and relaxation time that you're not getting. Then, you know, you got to take those 2 weeks out of the year when, you know, well, we're not going to be able to go on vacation this year because I got to do, you know, that 2-week annual drill stuff. And so when people don't understand that, when people have not been a part of that and still criticize it, I think it is just massively inappropriate. And that really, you know, we joke a lot about stuff that pisses me off. This actually does.
Yeah.
Because you don't get to call the quality of somebody's service into question when you haven't served. Just don't do it.
Yeah.
It's not a fucking First Amendment issue to say don't do it. Don't just don't do it. You know, one, it's wrong. It's wrong to call that into question. But two, I think it is a very poor tactical decision in this circumstance with Tim Walz.
Yeah, exactly.
To call his service into question, to say somehow those 24 years weren't honorable enough, when the guy at the top of our ticket got a deferment in Vietnam.
For bone spurs.
Yeah, for bone spurs, right? And you know what? He got that deferment when loads of people like him got those deferments. I'm not calling that into question.
Yeah.
And I think it'd be wrong for other people that weren't in that circumstance to call it into question. Right? Like, nobody wanted to go to Vietnam. That's where, you know, 58,000 Americans died there. You know, people were trying to get out of that service. And it's not appropriate for us to call that into question, just like it's not appropriate to call the quality of Tim Walz's service into question. He embellishes his record, go after it. Go for it.
Yep.
Just don't call the quality of his service into question, especially if you haven't been there and you don't understand it. That's what I'm pissed off about, Kyle.
Good point. Very good point.
God, you're cheaper than therapy, buddy. I love you.
Hey, like I said, like you said, we joke around a lot, but that's not something to joke around about. So, no, I think that's well-spoken and good advice for everybody. So, well, thank you again for another week, another fun episode. And again, we'll be back next week to talk about ballot issues. In the meantime, if somebody wants to start reading up on ballot issues, obviously Some of them have their own campaign sites, but if you want to get an overview, Colorado Secretary of State's website has information, and Ballotpedia actually had some pretty solid information about each one of the ballot issues. So a couple of different resources. There's probably others.
I'll
But
bet we can
take a
drop
look at-
some links in the comments sections on YouTube and Facebook if you want to go check them out. We'll get that done.
Cool. Sounds good. Hey, take it easy.
All right. Hey, before we go, what should people do?
Subscribe to YouTube.
That's right. Like and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. We really want you to go to YouTube, but Facebook is great as well. And also, if you have some comments for us, obviously I put this my thoughts out there on Facebook, knowing that I was going to get a lot of negative feedback on this whole service issue. I think it's hard to try to really articulate what I'm feeling about it. Just in a few sentences on Facebook. But if you have comments for us, please go drop us a comment. We want to respond to those. And we really want your feedback on, this episode, this rant, and just anything in general.
Great. Thanks, Mark.
Talk to you later, Kyle.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.